Hello and welcome back to the photography show and the video show Spring Shoots. This is one of our clinic sessions where it's an informal chat about a topic, and this one's all about shooting outdoors, landscapes and nature. So professionals, amateurs, everyone is taking their photography and filmmaking equipment outdoors to make the most of the current situation that we find ourselves in. So what this session is, it's a chance to get advice from a range of experts on kit and techniques for shooting landscapes and nature, whatever the weather, wherever you are. So we are joined by a bevy, no, a kit bag of experts. I don't know what the collective noun is for a bunch of photographers, a gang of photographers who are all ready to talk about their kit and techniques. What I should say is pop your questions in the window on the right-hand side. I can see there are some questions that have come in already. Give us your questions. Tap on the ask your question here bit. You'll see Chris Greenwood has asked a question, which we'll come to in just a moment's time. Let us have those questions and we will chew the fat over those for the next 45 minutes or however long it takes, really. I think we should probably meet our experts now. So joining us, we have Jeremy Walker, James Gilbert and Lee Tibbett. Rather than me introducing them, they can blooming well introduce themselves. So Jeremy, let's hear from you first of all. Thank you very much for joining us. Tell us a bit about you and your work, please.
Right, yeah, I've been a professional photographer for 30 plus years, specializing in location work, mostly landscape, a little bit of architecture, but I'm known for my landscape work. I'm known for my panoramic work. I've worked with Nikon. I've been one of their ambassadors. I'm currently a Zeiss ambassador, and I also work with Lee filters. But my specialization is very much landscapes.
And I know we're going to cover this in just a moment. You had a book out.
Yeah, the instructions to this said this is not a sales or a plug opportunity, but here we go. Just published my first book. It's all about landscapes and linked with a bit of history and ruins within their landscape setting. Available from my website. It's been a long-term project, and I think I've probably driven most of my friends up the wall with how many years it's actually taken to put it together, but very fulfilling and very worthwhile. And I say the book's available from the website.
And because I asked you the question, that's fine. And I know we'll come on to that in a moment. And you know, maybe, and I'll put this to those of you who are watching as well. You know, if that's something you want to chat about a bit, then you know about what that process is, what that journey is. Then you know, pop the question into the chat, and we'll chuck it into the mix there. Thank you very much indeed, Jeremy. James Gilbert, I don't think you and I have spoken before, so I'm keen to learn a bit more about you and your work.
Thank you, David. So I am a field training specialist for Fujifilm, which sounds a lot grander than it is. Basically, I get to help people with cameras all day long. So I will train staff in your local camera shop. We also do webinars as well. And I get to do things like this as well. So basically, I'm a walking instruction manual. When I'm doing photography for me, especially for landscapes, I'll be using a range of cameras off the system, but it will be whichever camera I've got, I'll usually be set to Acros with red filter.
There we go. Thank you very much indeed. What a great job. What a great job. If you love cameras, if you love photography, and you know, I think for many people who I'm speaking to today, they barely see it as a job because they get to live their passion and share that passion, that expertise, the things that they've learned and the stories that go with it, with everyone else. Thank you very much indeed. And finally, Lee Tibbett, tell me a bit more about you and your work, please.
Hi, David. Well, I'm a landscaper as well. I live in Taunton, so I'm a West Country man. My landscapes is purely mostly around the West Country, although I do occasionally pop up to various parts of the UK, Scotland in particular. I occasionally do some workshops for myself and sometimes work with Sigma as well. I'm a brand ambassador for Sigma UK, and I'm a big fan of the Foveon sensor and anything to do with Sigma really. So I get to use a lot of their cameras and lenses. And that's it in a nutshell. I'm a Cornishman as well, so I'm a bit slow. So bear with me with that one. Sorry about that.
do not apologize from coming from one of the most beautiful parts of our islands. Thank you very much indeed, Lee. Real-time feedback. This is what I love about the photography show and the fact that we are genuinely live. We've got real-time feedback on what a collection of photographers is called. Lee, thank you very much for saying surely a group of photographers should be a clique of photographers. Interesting. Click. There's a couple of different ways that you can read that, but really interesting. And another one, Malin Long says the collective noun is a bellows of photographers. Interesting. I hadn't heard that one before. Thank you very much indeed. Keep those coming in. I want to go back to the first question that landed in my chat here. And Jeremy, I'll come to you in here as well, because Chris Greenwood says, I've just finished reading Jeremy's book. It gives a great insight into the life of a landscape photographer. He has a couple of questions. Let's pop this one in first of all then. In terms of locations, Chris asks, do you have a favorite location? I'll expand that question maybe a little bit to ask about how, do you have a favorite location? How do you go about finding new locations, scouting locations? How many times do you visit a location before you decide on what and how you want to shoot there?
Okay, so favorite location, let's keep it to the UK. Couple of locations really. North Wales, Snowdonia, but particularly the industrial areas, the slate mines, the quarries, things like that. It's the sort of the ruins, the social history sort of mingled with the actual landscape. That's what draws me in. So I love Snowdonia, I love North Wales, but also for just pure stunning landscapes, Scotland, the Isle of Skye has to be one of the best ones up there, sort of thing. In terms of finding locations, I'm a bit of a dinosaur. I was around before, sort of Instagram and things like that. And it used to be a case of you got out and you walked the footpaths, you looked at Ordnance Survey maps, maybe you read an article in a newspaper and you thought that looks interesting, and you actually went off and explored and did the legwork yourself. Whereas now I think there's a tendency to Google something, or you buy the guidebook and you stand exactly where everybody else has stood. I'm kind of old fashioned. I like to go and look for locations that maybe not so many people are shooting. Yes, I shoot one or two of the sort of the honeypot locations. I live relatively near Corfe Castle, and we all want to shoot Corfe in the mist, but it's nice to get away and try and find a few things that maybe other people sort of haven't sort of really discovered yet.
And when you are scouting out those locations, do you just take your camera, take your kit with you, and the first time you're there, you're going to go, yep, okay, this is it. I've got everything I need to know. Snap, snap, snap. Or is there a sense, right, okay, I'm going to come back at 6 o'clock in the morning because that's going to be the right time next Sunday because I can see the weather's going to be misty or whatever. Do you shoot as is, or do you tend to prep when you're shooting in a new place?
Okay, so when I'm heading out on location, particularly a new location, I will carry a camera, but I'll keep the kit to an absolute minimum. I've been using Nikon since I started out, but a year or two ago, I actually bought myself a Leica M10. And just to bung that in a rucksack with just a 35mm lens and a couple of sort of Lee grads, it means that if I'm on the recce and it just so happens the light comes good or the conditions come good, one, I can still get a shot, but two, I can do reconnaissance pictures anyway. So I always carry a camera. 99 times out of 100, you're going to be going back to a location. You're not going to get it first time. It's very rare just to turn up, shoot, and know you've got the image. It's very much a case of go, walk the footpaths, look at the angles, do the research, and then look at the weather forecast, look at where the sun's rising, where the sun's setting, even look at the time of year, visualize the location with mist or fog or storm clouds, work out what you want, and then it's a question of logging the location and going back, maybe up to a few years later you might be going back, but it's very rare to actually just walk to a location, shoot it, got it, and then go again. Yeah,
sure. I'll chuck that question out to the rest of our panel as well. in terms of when you are looking for locations. Lee, for example, you mentioned Cornwall is your stomping ground. I take it you're able to make good use of the locations that are available to you there. Do you know your turf very, very well? Is that one of the keys to being able to capture it well?
Yeah, I think so, David. I mean, I was born down in Cornwall. I spent my first 25 years of my life, most beaches, most weekends with the family. So over the years, you get to know places quite well. There's places down there that I still now don't know particularly well. And a bit like Jeremy, I tend to buy the OS maps. Even now, I find them really helpful. I do use Google Maps from time to time as well. And it's just a case of getting out there. Again, I'm not trying to sell Sigma stuff here, but this is a little camera I take with me. It's quite a relatively old camera now, but it's a Sigma. So I take that one with me. It's lightweight, and again, a few filters. And just if it's a record shot initially, it gives me some ideas for, some more trips. But yeah, I don't know. I think over the years now, with a lot of these apps that have come out in, I don't know, the last 5 or 10 years, it does make life easier. I don't know if it's, all good, but it does definitely help you with finding locations.
Instagram reconnaissance and research. Yes, that certainly is a thing. And James, I'll turn that one over to you. Do you have any strategies when you're going out shooting in terms of finding locations, or you shoot what you find? Go somewhere and hope it's going to be a good one.
It's a little bit of column A and column B, really. Obviously, with my role, I'm across the country quite a lot. I'm going to all sorts of different places. And usually when I'm there, I've got a kit bag full of lenses because I'm carrying to demonstrate. So when I'm working and I find myself in very scenic places, which I'm fortunate enough to do, I can essentially go to the kit bag and take out what I need. But when I'm shooting for me personally, I'll usually have a kind of short, mid-wide prime, something like a kind of a 24mm effective or a 35mm effective, and then something a little bit longer, like perhaps an 85 effective, something like that. And I'll have a rough idea where the kind of scene I'm going to see. For example, before lockdown, I was out shooting down at Seven Sisters, which, for those that don't know, it's on the south coast. It's all chalk cliffs, and it's really very pleasant. So in black and white on the right day with the right light, I knew it was going to be good. So I knew roughly what I was going to get. But similarly to Jeremy, it's a case of I will go the first time. I'm surprised if I get the shot first visit. It has happened every now and again, but it's not often. But I will go and recce the place, have an idea, and then it might be a case of if I've carried a lens that's not quite wide enough or too wide or whatever, I can go back and have another go.
Super, thank you. And I hope that was a responsible answer to your question, Chris. Just clicking on down through the questions that are coming in, one around panoramas from Scott Ray. And I don't know to what extent we've got extensive landscape panorama experience on a panel, but yes, Jeremy, I thought you might raise your thumb there. Scott Ray asks, how do you make panoramas, especially wider ones, grab people's attention in a small screen world? Interesting question. Jeremy.
Really interesting that he's picked up on the fact that small screen world, we all look at Instagram, and yet you cannot turn your phone on its side and use it elongated. It is a flaw. You would have thought it's a simple software thing to be able to do that. And every time I've posted panoramics on Instagram, what I tend to do is I put a big black margin top and bottom to actually make the image into more of a regular oblong format with the panoramic running through the middle. But Instagram is not a great place to show panoramics. Facebook, yeah, absolutely not a problem, but Instagram, it is a problem. There is hard. There is virtually no way around it. Some photographers will divide their picture up into 3, and you have to flick through the screen to see the whole panoramic. But to me, it just doesn't work, because I think the idea of a panoramic is you want to see the glory of that shape and that view and that format in one go. And Instagram doesn't lend itself to it.
And I have also seen that. That's a really interesting point. And I do like that element of being able to swipe across the different screens. But I take your point, you don't get a chance to see the whole picture. Something else I've seen quite a lot is where people are very organized, and on their Instagram profile page, where you've got the grid of, is it 3x3 or 3 by however many, you can then organize your pictures across that, but you're so zoomed out at that point. So my question to you and to the rest of the panel, given some of the limitations of the small screen and the platforms that we use, is there anything that you can do compositionally to give that image some impact, despite the fact that it is going to be, kind of shrunken somewhat?
In terms of composition, I think any image, whether it's a panoramic or not, the way you see the world, the way you construct your image is absolutely vital. But I wouldn't be shooting things just to fit it on Instagram. Instagram is just a way of showing images, sort of thing. I would be looking to compose an image how I want to compose the image to be, not compose the image because I want to get it on Instagram. So I don't know that there's any particular way of composing an image, because you alter the way you work just to get your work onto Instagram. And I wouldn't want to do that, because I think it compromises the way you look at the world. I don't know whether Lee does panoramics or not, but I think, any photographer wants to shoot an image how they want to shoot it. They don't want to be constrained by a mobile phone, to be honest.
I guess the counter, and I'm agreeing with you, but I guess there's a counter argument there. If Instagram is your target medium, or other small screens, knowing where your audience is at, I guess is the counter argument to that. But I totally get your point. If you're going out with a vision for an image, then don't hamstring it by thinking about how some people might be choosing to view it. Lee, I got the nod there. Sorry, the shake around panorama for you. I don't know, James, if you've got anything to chuck in there around ways of making panoramas pop, no matter what screen or bit of paper you're looking at them on.
Yeah, I mean, as if you are shooting for, as you said, for those that are shooting perhaps for Instagram or for screens specifically, obviously the size of your subject, a big landscape, perhaps your foreground detail or your background detail might be quite small. So I would suggest either going for really kind of punchy colors and contrasts if you can. So if you're shooting black and white, get as much tonal range as you feasibly can. If HDR is your thing, then fair enough. For me, I tend not to, but I try and get a really contrasty scene. So there's a lot of impact, even if you're not necessarily seeing the detail specifically, you're seeing the shapes and the tones. And then of course for colors as well, getting really vibrant colors if you're doing a sunset or a sunrise, so that people, even if they don't see specifically what you've taken a photograph for detail, they can go, wow, the colors are great. What's that actually a picture of?
Scott, thank you very much indeed for your question. Certainly sparked off an interesting conversation there. This one here, probably a little bit more of a straightforward answer. Famous last words. This question from Richard. Richard Bance, thank you for your question. A question to any of the photographers. He says, what is your preferable I say it every day and I just got it wrong. Megapixel. Megapixel? What's a megapixel? What is your preferable megapixel size for creating the best landscapes? Lee, when you're shooting your landscapes, do you prefer to go for 50 megapixel images, or are you much smaller? What do you tend to go with?
Well, up until recently, it's a bit of a debate really with the foveal sensors that Sigma use, but I mean, up until recently, it's been difficult because they're, the last foveal sensor was a 15 megapixel chip. So it was 15 megapixels per layer of color. So you had 3 different layers. which made made it quite a debate really for the amount of pixels the sensor had. The latest camera, which I've got here with me, it's the FP. It uses a Bayer sensor. This is a 24 megapixel sensor, and to be honest, I shoot with it at full res, and for me, it's big enough for it's adequate for what I want to use. You know, I mean, I know there's a lot of cameras out there now that have got bigger and larger chips in them, but I can print A2 on my printer home here, and I'm more than happy with the results. The Foveon, it's a little bit different. I mean, those chips are pretty amazing, really. If you've got the capabilities of printing up to A1 or even A0, you can really print large with the sensor. But no, 24 megapixels for me covers all the bases. It's everything I want anyway.
Yes, interesting. We've gone from the small screen to the big print here. Jeremy and James, tell me your take on the megapixel, if I can say it right today, on the megapixel story. Is more better, or is there a happy medium lower down than the numbers?
Well, for me personally, I mean, I've got the GFX 100S, which is 100 megapixels. So that's very much enough data for me. Yeah. I would always prefer to have more data than less if possible, but it does depend on what I'm using it for. If I am printing kind of A2, A3, then a 24 megapixel sensor like in our XT4 or something like that will be absolutely fine. But if I wanted to then print a huge billboard or whatever, or have no limitations on the size I print, then of course a GFX would be the way to go. And again, you've got two choices there, either a 50 meg or 100 megapixel. I'm very much of the personal opinion that I would rather have more and scale it down than have some and perhaps maybe one day wish I had some more. But it also depends on what you're shooting for. If you're shooting for a shot that perhaps in 2, 3, 4 years you might want to print up huge, then more resolution is better. But as with everything, you can have too much of a good thing. And I think as long as you're within kind of a boundary of somewhere, for me personally, between kind of 20 at least, anywhere above there is absolutely fine.
Cool. Finally, Jeremy, what do you tend to shoot at when you're going out and shooting your landscapes?
In terms of megapixels, I think first off, there's a danger that people can chase their own tails, just wanting more and more and more megapixels. Now I know, the new Fuji is superb. I've got a colleague who's using one already. But how many megapixels do you actually need to produce your job? I've got the Leica M10, which I use for sort of a lot of street stuff and some landscape stuff. And at 24 megapixel, I can produce pretty good prints from that. I'm also using the Nikons, where the D850, I think you're up to something like 45 megapixel. You can produce good panoramics out of that. But it comes down to what the end use is. I mean, if you're just going to stick stuff on Instagram, then you don't need, too many pixels, to be honest. It does depend what you're doing. Certain things, going back to the panoramic thing, the new Fuji would be brilliant for panoramics because you don't have to stitch. You could just crop the image top and bottom, and you've still got a massive file for one single frame, which, if you're shooting coastal stuff, crashing waves, you can't do a stitched panoramic. All of my panoramics are stitched. There are 3 images stitched. But if you've got a crashing wave, you can't go click, oh, look, it's all moved, it's not going to stitch together. And I think that's where cameras like the new Fuji are an advantage if you're into panoramics. So it does very much depend on what you're doing. But I think once you hit that sort of 24 megapixel and above, you can pretty much do most things with an image.
Thank you. Absolutely. Sorry, no, go ahead.
I was just saying to elaborate more on Jeremy's point. He's absolutely right. The GFXs will shoot 65 by 24 as an aspect ratio. So if you are doing a panoramic and you want to do it in one hit, like a wave crashing as an example, you can actually, you'll see that in the viewfinder and you'll see that on the rear screen as well. And because you've got the resolution on the sensor, cropping it down to such a narrow ratio means you're still going to have a large file size at the end, which of course will give you more flexibility for editing as well.
Lee, I just want to come back to you because obviously we were chatting about panoramas there, but I understand that you prefer to shoot in a square format rather than in the wide format. Tell us a little bit more about that choice and how that changes how you view composition when it comes to landscape.
Well, I started shooting square probably about 3 years ago now, 3 or 4 years ago, and it was a conscious decision. I decided it was the way I wanted to go. I was a great follower of people like Michael Kenner and Bruce Percy, people like that, and I just loved their style of work. And I decided that's, you know, I want to have my own sort of take on it, but that's the way I wanted to go with things. So I've basically just kept to square now for the last 3 or 4 years pretty well. Occasionally, I know every composition doesn't suit square. So some days I go off and it's a case of, you know, I'm quite a slow photographer anyway. I take the time over things, but I decided to go down that route. Often for when I'm shooting square, I'll just stick a prime on the end of my camera, prime lens. Little bit of walking involved, obviously. So I'm, as the Americans say, I'm using foot zoom instead of a zoom lens. Yeah, I tend to do that. For me, it's something that I think was a good decision. I've not looked back since, as far as I've been happy where my photography's been going. You know, I know sometimes we all have times where we think, you know, am I doing the right thing? But I've just really enjoyed it. Compositionally, I find initially when I first started shooting square, my brain was telling me to try to work to certain things, rules of thirds and things. And then I realized shooting square actually, quite often, prime example for me being a Cornishman, St. Michael's Mount. I'd go down there and I'd photograph the mount, and I would photograph different ways. So I would shoot the mount being in the center of the frame, and then I would shoot it with intersecting a third of the frame, and I would find that, you know, actually it looked, to me, the image looked far more pleasing to the eye with the mount being central to the frame, you know. So I find shooting square that the rules can be, in my opinion, more relaxed than shooting 3x2. You know, you can get away with things, or you can do things that maybe 3x2 may not work quite so well. So yeah, I mean, square, I've just got to love it, and I've stuck with it ever since. And that's it, really. I don't know what else to say about it. It's just what I've decided to stick to, and that's the way I've gone with my photography.
I think the format discussion's a really interesting one, particularly when it comes to landscapes as well. Maybe we'll get some more questions on that. If you've got some questions, you know, portrait, landscapes, whatever else, chuck them in the questions. We're coming back to questions now. Mrs. Cook, hello, Mrs. Cook, thank you for tuning in today, asks this, and this will be to all three of our panelists, I guess. Mrs. Cook is planning a second trip to the Antarctic. Wow. Shooting with Fuji X-H1, have lots of images in mind. And the question is this: what recommendations do people have for lenses that don't weigh a ton to make the most of some of the most dramatic landscapes on the globe? So, shooting with a Fuji X-H1, let's broaden that out a little bit while addressing Mrs. Cook's point. But in terms of lenses that are going to allow you to be agile, nimble, not weigh too much, but still give you some creative options. Suggestions, please. Jeremy, I'll come to you first of all there.
Yeah, come to me first, because then James can correct me, because he knows obviously the Fuji kit. Thank you. In terms of being sort of lightweight, portable, flexible, I mean, I've traveled the world with a Nikon 2470 for years and years and years. Now, I won't say it's the lightest lens in the world, but certainly it means you haven't got to change lenses. If you're in the Arctic or the Antarctic and the conditions, there's snow and hail or whatever, you don't have to change lenses, which has got to be a good thing. But over the years, I've actually moved more towards shooting with primes, and I would rather just have one prime on my camera, not worry about changing lenses or anything, just concentrate on one prime, and you make that lens work for you, because I think you'll actually go and look for the pictures. You will make more of an effort rather than stand in one spot and just zoom. You will go and walk and search. Whether that's possible on the trip she's planning on doing, I don't know. But my preference would be just for a couple of primes, maybe a 35 and a 50 or something like that. But I have spent many years traveling with a 2470 and a 70-200, but they're not particularly lightweight. Maybe with the new mirrorless cameras, I think the lenses are tending to be sort of lighter than sort of more traditional lenses. So maybe James can sort of narrow it down a bit more, but my preference would be for a couple of primes, a 50 and a 35.
Yeah, and sneaker zoom, as Lee was alluding to a moment ago. Right then, so James, looks as though the parcel's being thrown your way here. I guess what I'm interested in, and you mentioned the 70-200 there, Jeremy. If you are at the Antarctic, maybe you are on a boat, maybe you're not able to do landfall. Maybe you're trying to capture some wildlife, whatever that may be. Maybe you do need something on the longer end. What are your suggestions?
Well, it sounds like a fantastic trip. I mean, what a trip to go on. Obviously, in those kind of conditions, I would be looking at a weather-resistant lens, as the XH1 is a weather-resistant body as well. So that would be a concern. So I would suggest something like the 10-24 millimeter f4, which will give 15-36 effective as a kind of a dual kind of zoom for the wide angle. That's also got the image stabilization on it as well, because I'm assuming that a tripod won't be carried. So that would be as a flexible choice. I agree about small primes. That's a really good way of working as well. If you want the lightest prime, or one of the lightest primes, would be something like the 16 2.8, which will give you 24 effective, which weighs 155 grams, which is not a lot, or if you're old school, 5.5 ounces. But that's a very small lens as well. It's really small and compact, can easily go in a pocket. So it can be kept warm when obviously it's not being used, which is another thing to consider. But if you're looking for a 50mm effective, the 35mm f2 is also a WR, and that's slightly larger, but again, very small pocketable lens. As far as a longer lens goes, possibly something like the 90mm f2 would be good, or if you're going to do a little bit of close-up or you're not quite sure what you're going to see, the 80mm f2.8 macro, or as a longer lens as a zoom, a 50-140 f2.8, which is a 70-210 2.8, and that's weather resistant as well. Right, a lot of lenses there. Mrs. Cook, yes. Mrs. Cook writes in to say Mrs. Cook's name is Linda, not Mrs. Cook. Well, that just came under Mrs. Cook here. Linda, Mrs. Cook, I hope that was very helpful. Lee, I'll just come over to you finally and just bolt on another question. If you're going out on a shoot and could only take one lens with you, what lens would that be?
Oh, crikey.
Yeah, sorry about that one.
No, that's a good one. It's a really good one. Well, the answer to that would be plain and simple, really. This camera is actually it's the camera lens is what it is. It's the lens is fixed to the camera. This is how it comes. This is what I take with me. So it's an APS-C camera, but it's a 14mm lens. So I think it equates to about a 19mm prime lens on this camera. I use this one for a lot of my photography, and I really love this lens. It's not the fastest of lenses. It's not f2.8 or anything like that. It's actually f4, but it's a very, very sharp lens. So that's the lens I would pick personally, and yeah, it's done me proud over the years. So yeah, it's I know it's not the answer you're asking for, a lens, but it's actually a lens and a camera all in one.
Of course, of course. Jeremy, you found that question quite funny about one lens to take with you. I'm going to throw that one. I'm going to throw that one to you because of that. If you were to be going out on a landscape shoot, you know, going wherever, Isle of Skye or something like that, and you only had space in your pocket for one lens, what would be your go-to?
Well, I say my go-to lens used to be 24-70.
Yeah.
But I am getting a little bit older. I don't like lugging heavy kit around anymore. If I go out now and I could only take one lens, I'd actually just take a 50mm. And if I was really, really squeezed on weight and size and everything, I'd actually take the Leica M10 with a Leica 50mm, because they are teeny, teeny wee, and make do with that. But I just think the 50mm, the reason why I laugh is I think I probably own 6 or 7 50mm lenses. I am a bit of a 50mm anorak, I'm afraid. So, but I would, yeah, 50mm is what I go. It's not ideal for everything, obviously, but certainly you can do panoramics with a 50mm quite happily, and you can do portraits with a 50mm. So there's a nice balance with a 50mm.
Yeah.
So I say I'm a 50mm anorak, I'm afraid.
Good old 50mm. I have a 50mm as well, and actually not so much when I'm indoors, which I am a lot at the moment, but certainly when I'm out and about, my 50mm does get an awful lot of use. Thank you very much indeed, and Linda, Mrs. Cook, and also some other people who were asking some of those questions as well. Jackie, about the one lens take with you. I hope that was informative. I want to, in some of the time that we've got left, we mentioned a moment ago, filters. We haven't touched on use of filters out on location yet. Now, this is a world, I'm not going to lie, I am entirely, it's entirely foreign to me. So who wants to pick up on use of filters out on location in the first place? Jeremy, take it away.
Yeah, filters. I would have to put my hand up before I say anything about filters. I get sponsored by Lee Filters. So, you know, hands up. They do sponsor me.
Again, I asked you the question, so and we've got a question from the audience, so as far as I'm concerned, that's fine.
Apparently other brands are available, but virtually all my work, when I go on location, again, it's a bit like if you could only carry one lens, if you could only carry one filter. And I would take the Lee way of doing things is they do sort of 0.3, 0.6, 0.9, and it's 1 stop, 2 stop, 3 stop. So I would actually carry a 0.6 hard edge grad or a medium edge grad for controlling the sky. Now, I actually carry less filters today than I did 10 years ago, because as James was about to tell you, the cameras, the sensors are getting so good, the dynamic range is getting so good that they can actually control highlight and shadow, and everything's quite good. But I still carry a grad just to control skies. Polarizer every now and then, and for a bit of fun, the Lee Big Stopper for doing the long blurry exposures.
Yeah.
But if you were keeping things to an absolute minimum and you're traveling, perhaps you're on holiday, or you're limited with time, weight, space, things like that, just a holder and a couple of grads and a polarizer will, put you in the ballpark for most landscape images.
James, Lee, are you have you used filters when you've been out shooting on location?
Yes. So apart from protection filters for the front of the lenses, which I thoroughly recommend, I tend to use a polarizing filter if I am using a filter. I don't tend to use graduated filters. Because, as Jeremy said, the sensors these days are extremely good at getting a lot of dynamic range. We have on our cameras the ability to actually expand the dynamic range on the image. So we could do 200% and 400%. It increases your base ISO a little bit, but then amplifies the image slightly less. So you don't blow out your highlights, you keep your shadows, and it's a really nice, smooth, graduated tone. But I use a polarizing filter mostly, especially when shooting water, because it will knock out the reflections.
Yeah.
But I also use it for if I'm doing kind of any forests or anything like that, or anything with a lot of plant life that perhaps has waxy leaves. And if there's a lot of light going around, a polarizing filter will just kind of knock out the flare coming off the leaves. You'd be surprised how much there is. And it just gives a little bit more punch to the scene overall. So as I said, I tend not to use a graduated filter or anything like that. Obviously, a big stop is nice for doing some cool stuff with a lot of movement in the scene, perhaps. I do tend to use a graduated filter. It's slightly off topic, but for portraits outdoors, if I want to use some fill-in flash, because it will allow me to use a shallower depth of field because I can open up the aperture more. But for landscapes, it's mostly a polarizer and, of course, a protection filter.
Yeah, and you're right. I think a protection filter's about as much as I use. I do have a circular polarizer as well, and I did have a Grad ND for a little while. I've probably in a drawer down there somewhere, but again, I've not had a chance to use it. Lee, are you a filter shooter, or do you go au naturel?
No, I'm a filter shooter too, David. Yeah, I shoot with case filters. I have about 5 or 6 that I carry with me, but I've only generally used 1 or 2. A CPL nearly all of the time, or most of the time anyway, especially with the water, similar to what James was saying, really. Probably my go-to filter would be for sunsets. I've got a 3-stop reverse grad, which I particularly like. One thing I would mention that I think a lot of people, well, don't forget about it, but it's something that I've gone out before and forgotten, is some cleaning cloths and an umbrella, because the number of times I've got back and I've got raindrops and things on the images from filters, I've lost count how many times that's happened. So that's it. I just use a few, but another one is a 6-stop ND filter as well, which I quite like for that sort of soft, milky sort of look as well. But always carry a cloth and or an umbrella anyway. Take an umbrella with you. I always do.
I'm fortunate with the cameras that I tend to work with in film and TV. We've got NDs built in, which makes life a lot easier as far as working on set is concerned. Actually, James, and that's another point. It hadn't occurred to me before when it comes to polarizing. Obviously water, that's a very common use case, but you mentioned that kind of waxy glare off of leaves and things. That's really interesting. That hadn't occurred to me before. Thank you very much for the filter question. Let's move on in the time that we've got left. Steve Champion. Oh, here's an interesting one. Right. So, and we were talking about this earlier on today in another session with Mark Aspland, who've been using tilt shift lenses in some perhaps non-standard ways to create interesting effects. And Steve asks here, I know some professional photographers use tilt and shift lenses to get front to back focus in landscapes. Anyone here, and a no is fine, but anyone here have any experience of using tilt shift lenses to achieve this or any other interesting effects? Or if not, when using standard lenses, what methods do they adopt to get that depth of focus? Who wants to pick up on that one? Yes, Jeremy.
Tilt shift. I've owned a couple, and I'd have to admit I don't anymore. I've had the Nikon 45 tilt shift and the 19mm they did, and basically they're replicating what people used to be able to do on a 5.4 or a 10.8 field camera, and it's the Scheinflug principle. So if you can't get to sleep at night, Google the Scheinflug principle, and you will be asleep or very confused within minutes. But it's basically, it's a way of getting everything sharp front to back without having to stop the camera down to an incredibly small aperture. And again, as Mark Aspland was saying, you can do weird creative things with it. But now with computers and things, the use of tilt shifts is becoming less and less because you've now got focus stacking in software afterwards. So you just shoot, refocus, shoot, refocus. And I've certainly, the Nikons do it. I'm sure the Fujis will do it. Where you can just shoot 100 images and it happily puts it all together. So tilt shifts used to be an incredibly valuable tool, but nowadays, say I've got rid of mine purely because I can do what they do. I can do it in software.
Super. Anyone else have any pros, cons, experiences, or otherwise with tilt shift? Yes, James.
Yeah, I've used tilt shift in the past. I still shoot 5.4. I've got some Velvia downstairs in the fridge, which I still use because we have. Well, it's a beautiful thing to use, but we also do a 5.4 adapter for the GFX, so you can put it on the international back. So although it's not a tilt shift lens specifically, a view camera, of course, will act like a tilt shift lens because they are just miniaturized. I like to use tilt shift lenses not just for depth of field with the shine flood principle, but also as well for architecture. If I'm doing a cityscape and I can't shoot from too far back and I want to shoot up, a tilt shift will allow me to knock out the converging verticals, which is quite useful. As far as focus stacking goes, yes, we do it. Depending on the model, the new GFX 100S, for example, on previous models, it was a more involved system. You would choose how much the lens would shift based on a percentage of the depth of field of the aperture you've chosen, and then choose the number of shots, and you'd have to do all the calculations to make sure your scene was in focus throughout. Now it's choose your aperture, focus at your beginning, focus at your end, push the button, and it does it all for you as a sequence. It's really quick. But an alternative way of doing it, if you don't want to do that many shots, or you just want to do one, or you haven't got the time for it, I tend to use focus peaking in a way to work like hyperfocal distancing was back in the day. So I'll set the camera to manual. I'll choose focus peaking, usually with a red outline, because not much in nature is red, so it'll contrast nicely. Choose my aperture, so something like f11, f16, depending on the lens. Stop down the lens, and that will show me how much focus I've got throughout the scene via focus peaking, and then just turn the lens till everything looks sharp, and it's really quick. So that's a fast way of doing it in one shot.
Super. Thank you very much indeed. So many comments. I'm having lots of fun trying to catch up with them. People having fun with the subtitles on here. Linda, Mrs. Cook says, thanks everyone. Great lightweight lens suggestions. So good. Happy customer there. We've got people saying a question actually for James. It's probably quite a specific one, but let's give it a go. This is from Harris. Thank you for your question, Harris. Question for James. Can the new 70 to 300mm Fuji be used for macro photography? He says he was thinking of buying the 100 to 400mm for wildlife and the 80mm for macro, but now just thinking to buy the 70mm to 300mm. Do you think that would be too much of a compromise? And that is from Harris. So yeah, James, that's a very specific question for you, but I'll throw it at you because I know you'll give it a stab.
I will indeed. As far as a specific lens for macro, I would suggest if you're doing macro specifically, I would suggest either the 80mm or the 60mm. The 80mm is a 1:1 macro. So it'll focus and give you a proper reproduction, 1:1 reproduction. The 60mm 2.4 is a half macro. You can put extension tubes on both of those. If you're looking for a lens that's more flexible, so you're not doing pure 1:1 macro, then a 70 to 300 would be okay. And of course, you can put the extension tubes on the back of that. You've got to be careful because you'll lose some light, as you would with any extension tube. But you can do that. But it depends on, for me, it would depend on what the priority is. If it's a lens that happens to do some close-up work, then yeah, fine. If it's a case of specifically wanting a macro lens, then I would suggest something like the 80mm or the 60mm 2.4.
Fantastic. Specific question, specific answer. And unfortunately, we are almost out of time for today. So gentlemen, James, Jeremy, Lee, thank you very much indeed for joining us and answering any of the questions. And boy, did we have some fun questions coming from our audience. Thank you to everyone at home or wherever you happen to be watching today for all of your questions as well. I'm sorry we were not able to get to all of them, but I hope we managed to cover what we did with interest for as many people as possible. The photography show carries on throughout today. Tomorrow I'm going to be chatting with Rankin in about an hour and 10 minutes time, so I'm going to go off and prep for that. But enjoy the show. Gentlemen, thank you very much indeed for joining us.
Thank you for having me.
Fantastic. Enjoy the rest of the show. See you later.
Cheers.
Cheers. Bye.
Bye.